Montana Territory, 1885. Willow Creek was a place where hope came to die. The bitter April wind howled through the valley, carrying the last remnants of winter's chill as Willa Nichols clutched her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her once fine blue calico dress, patched in 3 places but still respectable, whipped against her legs as she stared at the hand-painted signs swinging from the weather-beaten general store, Barton's Mercantile and Provisions. $3.42. That was all she had left in the world. Enough for 1 chicken, maybe some flour, but not both. Not enough to keep the promise she'd made to her dying father to save their homestead. Her fingers tightened around the coins in her pocket as she squared her shoulders and pushed through the door. The bell above tinkled, announcing her arrival to the lean, copper-haired man stocking shelves behind the counter. "Miss Nichols," he said, straightening his vest. "Wasn't expecting to see you in town so soon after." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable mentioning her father's passing 2 weeks prior. "Mr. Lowell," she acknowledged with a nod. The storekeeper's son had taken over the business just last year, and at 24, he ran the only lifeline to supplies for miles. She'd seen him from afar for years, but they'd rarely spoken beyond pleasantries. "I need a laying hen. Father's last ones fell to the fox, and I can't manage the spring planting with no food in the larder." Bennett Lowell leaned against the counter, his green eyes taking in her too thin frame and the determined set of her jaw. Unlike most men in the territory, his face was clean-shaven, making him look younger than his years. A strand of auburn hair fell across his forehead as he studied her. "1 chicken won't keep you fed for long," he said quietly. She lifted her chin. "It's what I can afford." Something flickered across his expression, not pity, which she would have resented, but something deeper. Understanding, perhaps. "The hens are out back. I'll show you." As they stepped into the yard behind the store where chickens scratched in the dirt, she felt the weight of the question hanging between them, the one the entire town was whispering. How long before Ezra Nichols' stubborn daughter lost everything he'd built? What they didn't know was that she'd already lost almost everything. The mortgage payment was due in 30 days. The spring planting needed to happen now, and she was alone with a half-built dream and no means to fulfill it. Bennett pointed to a plump Rhode Island red. "That one's a good layer. $3. She swallowed hard. "I'll take her." That would leave her with 42 cents, enough for a small sack of beans, perhaps. Nothing else. As she counted out the coins, she felt his eyes on her hands. Hands that were no longer soft like a proper lady's, but calloused from work she'd never expected to do alone. "Your father was a good man," Bennett said unexpectedly. "Came in here last month and ordered seed for 20 acres. Said this would be the year your place finally turned the corner." Her throat tightened. "He always said that." He meant it this time. Said he'd struck water on the North Ridge. Willa's head jerked up. "What? You didn't know?" Bennett looked genuinely surprised. "He found a spring. Said it would irrigate the whole upper section." Her heart pounded. Father had mentioned going to check something on the ridge the day before his heart gave out, but he'd never returned to tell her what he'd found. A spring meant everything. The difference between scraping by and thriving. If it existed. "I need to go," she said abruptly, reaching for the chicken. Bennett's hand closed over hers, warm and steady. "Miss Nichols, Willa, wait." He glanced toward the front of the store, then lowered his voice. "There's a man from Denver staying at the hotel. Represents the railroad. He's been asking questions about available land, offering top dollar." Her eyes narrowed. "My father's land is not for sale." "I know that," he said, "but others don't. Mason Webb has been telling everyone your place will be auctioned for back taxes within the month." The name sent a ripple of anger through her. Mason Webb, the banker's son who'd been trying to court her for years despite her refusals. The man who'd smugly told her after the funeral that he'd be happy to take care of her troubles if she'd only agree to marry him. "He's wrong," she said firmly, though uncertainty gnawed at her. How much did her father owe? She'd found no records. Bennett's gaze held hers for a moment too long. "I hope so," he said simply, then bent to pick up the chicken and secure its feet with twine. As he handed the bird to her, he added, "My father always said your land had the best soil in the county." She accepted the chicken with a nod of thanks, but as she turned to leave, Bennett called after her. "Miss Nichols." He hesitated, then continued, "I'd be happy to bring some supplies out to your place tomorrow. No charge, just to help a neighbor." Pride made her spine stiffen. I don't accept charity, Mr. Lowell. Not charity, he said quickly. Credit. To be paid when your crop comes in. The offer tempted her desperately, but she'd seen how credit crushed families in hard times. Thank you, but I'll manage. As she walked away, the chicken tucked under her arm. She felt his eyes on her back. What she didn't see was the way he watched her go, or how he immediately went to his ledger and began making calculations. She was halfway home when the skies opened. The spring rain came suddenly, drenching her in seconds. The chicken squawked in protest as Willa broke into a run, seeking shelter beneath a cottonwood. It was there, huddled against the trunk, that she spotted the rider approaching from the direction of town. Even through the curtain of rain, she recognized the broad shoulders and the way he sat his horse. Bennett Lowell. What business did he have out this way in such weather? Her question was answered as he drew closer. Tied to his saddle were bags of supplies, flour, coffee, salt, and more. Her pride bristled even as her stomach growled. Mr. Lowell, she called over the rain as he approached. If you've come to press your offer of credit, I've already declined. He dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse beneath the shelter of the tree. Rainwater ran from the brim of his hat as he removed it, revealing hair the color of autumn leaves. Actually, he said, I've come with a proposition. Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. What sort of proposition? A business arrangement. He glanced at the chicken, now huddled miserably against her. You need more than one bird to rebuild your flock, and I happen to have too many at the moment. My suppliers sent double my order. Rather than send them back, I thought perhaps we could strike a deal. She regarded him suspiciously. What kind of deal? I provide the chickens and seed for your spring planting. You provide eggs and a portion of your harvest in return. Simple commerce, Miss Nichols. Nothing more. It wasn't charity, not exactly, but it still felt too convenient. Why would you do this? His eyes met hers directly. Because your father helped mine when no one else would. When typhoid swept through town 10 years ago and everyone was afraid to come to our store, Ezra Nichols still traded with us. He kept us afloat. She hadn't known that. Her father rarely spoke of the past. Besides, Bennett continued, I'm a businessman. Your land produces the best wheat in the territory. I'd rather see you succeed and have a steady supplier than watch Mason Webb get his hands on it. The rain began to let up, pattering more softly through the leaves above. Willa studied the man before her, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motives. But all she saw was earnestness, and something else she couldn't quite name. I won't be beholden to any man, she said finally. You'll be a business partner, he corrected. Nothing more, nothing less. The chicken squawked again, as if offering its opinion. Willa couldn't help the small smile that curved her lips. I suppose I should consult my business advisor, she said, glancing down at the bird. Bennett's laugh was unexpected, a rich, warm sound that seemed to chase away the chill of the rain. And what does your advisor say? That one chicken makes for a poor start to a flock. She drew a deep breath. I accept your offer, Mr. Lowell. As a business arrangement only. He nodded, solemn once more, but his eyes held a glint of something that looked remarkably like triumph. I'll have the supplies delivered tomorrow. And perhaps, if you're amenable, I could take a look at that spring your father mentioned. As they parted ways, Willa couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in her world. She told herself it was simply relief at having a path forward. But as she watched Bennett Lowell ride back toward town, his broad shoulders straight despite the rain, she knew there was more to it, a question she wasn't ready to ask herself. What she didn't know was that Bennett was already making plans far beyond a simple business arrangement. Plans that had been forming since the first time he'd seen Willa Nichols ride into town at 16, sitting tall in the saddle beside her father, her chestnut hair gleaming in the sunlight. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the rain-washed world sparkling with promise. Willa rose before the sun, as always, to tend to the meager chores that remained on what had once been a thriving homestead. She'd just settled her new chicken, whom she'd whimsically named Hope, into a makeshift coop when she heard wagon wheels on the rutted dirt road. Bennett wasn't alone. 2 young boys sat beside him on the wagon seat, both with the same copper hair as their driver. My brothers, Bennett explained as he pulled the team to a halt. Thomas and Samuel. They insisted on helping when they heard where I was going. The youngest, no more than 12, hopped down eagerly. Are you really a lady farmer? He asked, eyes wide with curiosity. Samuel, Bennett admonished, but Willa found herself laughing for the first time in weeks. I suppose I am, she replied, though not a very successful one yet. You will be. The older boy, Thomas, said confidently as he began unloading supplies. Bennett says your father found water, and water changes everything. Indeed, the wagon contained far more than chickens and seed. There were tools, fencing materials, even a small plow designed for a single horse. When Willa protested that it was too much, Bennett simply shook his head. A proper business arrangement accounts for all needs, he said firmly. Now, shall we find that spring your father discovered? They spent the morning exploring the North Ridge, Bennett's brothers scouting ahead with boyish enthusiasm. It was Thomas who found it, a small but steady flow of water emerging from between two rocks, forming a clear pool before trickling down toward the valley. It's real, Willa breathed, kneeling beside the spring. Her father's last gift to her. With this water, the upper fields, the richest soil on their property, could finally be cultivated. Bennett knelt beside her, dipping his fingers into the cool water. With the right channels, you could irrigate at least 15 acres from this source, he said, his voice low with excitement. Your father was right. This changes everything. She looked up to find his face mere inches from hers, his green eyes bright, with a shared vision of possibility. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, the sound of water flowing between them. The spell broke when Samuel came crashing back through the brush, announcing he'd found berries. Bennett stood quickly, extending a hand to help her up. The brief touch of his calloused palm against hers sent an unexpected warmth through her fingers. By midday, they had mapped out irrigation channels and planned the spring planting. The boys had constructed a proper chicken coop, and 6 new hens now scratched contentedly in the yard alongside Hope. As they shared a simple lunch of bread and cheese in the shade of Willa's porch, Bennett's expression grew serious. There's something else you should know, he said, lowering his voice so his brothers wouldn't hear. Mason Webb came into the store yesterday after you left. He was asking questions about your father's debts. Willa's stomach clenched. What did you tell him? Nothing, but I did some checking with the county records clerk. Bennett hesitated. The mortgage on your land was held by First Territorial Bank, Mason's father's bank. There's a payment due at the end of the month. $50. The amount hit her like a physical blow. $50 might as well have been $500. I don't have it, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I know, Bennett said simply. So this, she gestured at the supplies, the chickens, the plans they'd made, was all for nothing. In 30 days, I'll lose everything anyway. Bennett's jaw tightened. Not if I can help it. Before she could ask what he meant, Thomas called out, pointing to a rider approaching from the main road. Willa recognized the sleek black horse and its pompous rider immediately, Mason Webb. Well, Mason called as he trotted into the yard, his thin mustache twitching with displeasure at the sight of Bennett and his brothers. Quite the gathering. I wasn't aware you were entertaining Miss Nichols. Mr. Webb, she acknowledged coolly, rising from her seat. What brings you this way? Mason dismounted, brushing imaginary dust from his expensive suit. At 28, he had already adopted his father's air of smug superiority. Just checking on a bank investment, he said, eyeing the new chicken coop with obvious disapproval. Though I see you're making improvements. Business partners, Bennett said smoothly, coming to stand beside Willa. Miss Nichols and I have entered into an arrangement. Her farm will supply my store exclusively. Mason's eyes narrowed as they flicked between them. How enterprising, though I fear it may be premature. There are matters of outstanding debts to consider. Which will be settled, Bennett replied before Willa could speak. Will they? Mason's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. $50 is a significant sum, especially for a woman alone. My father was quite clear about the consequences of default. Willa found her voice. The payment will be made, Mr. Webb, in full and on time. I'm relieved to hear it. His tone suggested the opposite. Still, these are difficult times. Should you reconsider my offer of assistance, and the terms I proposed, my door remains open. He glanced meaningfully at Bennett before adding, some offers won't wait forever. After Mason departed, an uncomfortable silence fell. Bennett's brothers exchanged confused glances, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. What did he mean by terms? Bennett finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. Willa turned away, unwilling to meet his eyes. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. The unexpected intensity in his voice made her look up. The emotion she saw in his face, anger, certainly, but also something fiercely protective, startled her. He proposed marriage, she admitted. The day after my father's funeral. Said he'd take care of all my troubles if I'd be his wife. Bennett's expression darkened. And your answer? Was no, of course. I'd rather lose the land than sell myself with it. The approving look that crossed his face warmed her more than it should have. But the problem remained. 30 days, $50, and no way to produce such a sum. That evening, after Bennett and his brothers had gone, promising to return the next day to begin work on the irrigation channels, Willa sat alone at her father's desk. She pulled out the small box where he had kept important papers, searching again for any clue, any hidden savings he might have set aside. Instead, she found a letter she'd never seen before, addressed to her in her father's unsteady hand. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. My dearest Willa, if you're reading this, I've gone to join your mother sooner than I planned. Forgive me for leaving you with so much unfinished. The spring on the North Ridge is the key. With that water, our land will finally yield what I've always known it could. But I fear I've left you in a precarious position. The bank loan comes due soon, and I know there isn't enough set aside. For this, I am deeply sorry. There is one hope. Bennett Lowell. His father and I made an agreement years ago, when you were both children. In exchange for my help during the typhoid outbreak, Richard promised that if anything happened to me, his son would ensure you never lost our land. I've never called in this debt, but perhaps now is the time. Bennett is a good man, better than his father, and certainly better than I deserved as a friend. Trust him, but remember that you are your mother's daughter. Never settle for less than a full heart. All my love. Father. Willa read the letter twice, her mind reeling. Had Bennett known of this promise? Was his sudden appearance, his generosity, merely the fulfillment of an old debt? The thought stung more than it should have. The next morning, she was waiting when Bennett arrived, alone this time. She thrust the letter at him without preamble. Did you know about this? Is that why you're helping me? Bennett scanned the page, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When he looked up, the confusion in his eyes seemed genuine. I knew nothing of any agreement between our fathers, he said. My father never mentioned this to me. Then why? She demanded. Why all this help? The supplies, the chickens, it's far more than a simple business arrangement would justify. Bennett ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. Because he stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Because it's the right thing to do. Your father was a good man. This land deserves better than to fall into Mason Webb's hands. It wasn't the whole truth. She could see that in the way he avoided her eyes. But it wasn't a lie either. Even if we get the irrigation channels dug and the crops planted, she said, there's no way to raise $50 in a month. Not from chickens and seeds that haven't even sprouted. Bennett was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant ridge. Finally, he said, there might be a way. The railroad man I mentioned, he's not just looking for land. He needs lumber for railroad ties. Your North Ridge has the best stand of pine in the county. Cutting timber would take weeks with just the two of us, Willa pointed out. Not if we had help. Bennett's eyes lit with sudden determination. Half the men in town owe me favors. A day's work from each, in exchange for credit at the store. He began calculating aloud. With 10 men, we could fell and process enough timber in a week to cover the mortgage payment twice over. The plan was bold, perhaps even feasible, but a nagging doubt remained. Why would you do this? She asked again, softer this time. Extend so much credit, risk your own business? Even for an old debt between our fathers, it seems. Too much, he finished when she trailed off. Yes. Bennett looked at her then, really looked at her, as if weighing something in his mind. Whatever debate he was having with himself, he appeared to reach a decision. The truth, then, he said, his voice low and earnest. I've watched you for years, Willa Nichols. The way you sat tall beside your father in that wagon, how you never complained even when the drought took half your crop, how you'd trade your last jar of preserved peaches for books from the East. A flush crept up his neck, but he continued, I admired you from afar because I had nothing to offer. My father's store was failing, and I was just the storekeeper's son. But now, she prompted when he paused. Now I own the store outright. I've expanded our supply routes. And when I saw you walk in yesterday, With just enough money for one chicken, but too much pride to ask for help, I knew I couldn't stand by any longer. His green eyes held hers steadily. This isn't charity, Willa. And it's not just business. It's me finally finding the courage to stand beside you instead of watching from a distance. The simple honesty of his confession left her speechless. How had she never noticed the way he looked at her? Had she been so focused on survival that she'd missed something important taking root right before her eyes? Before she could formulate a response, the sound of multiple horses approaching broke the moment. They both turned to see 5 riders cresting the hill. Mason Webb at the lead, his father the banker beside him, and 3 men she didn't recognize. "Trouble," Bennett muttered, instinctively stepping in front of her. "Miss Nichols," the elder Webb called as they approached. "I see you continue to receive assistance from Mr. Lowell." "Business partners," she replied firmly, echoing Bennett's words from the day before. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Webb?" The banker dismounted with the stiff formality of a man accustomed to command. "Indeed, I've brought potential buyers for your property. These gentlemen represent the railroad's interests." One of the strangers, a portly man with an expensive hat, nodded respectfully. "Ma'am, we understand you might be considering offers." "You understand incorrectly," Willa said coldly. "My land is not for sale." Mason Webb's smile was all teeth. "Perhaps I failed to make the situation clear yesterday. The mortgage payment of $50 is due in 28 days. In the event of default, the property reverts to the bank, at which point we would be free to sell to whomever we wish." "The payment will be made," Bennett said firmly. "In full." The elder Webb regarded him with thinly veiled contempt. "You intend to cover it yourself, I presume? How generous. One might almost suspect an ulterior motive." "Unlike some," Bennett replied evenly, "my interest is in seeing justice done. Ezra Nichols built this place from nothing. His daughter deserves the chance to continue his legacy." The railroad man cleared his throat awkwardly. "We're prepared to offer $300 for the property. That would clear the debt and leave Miss Nichols with a tidy sum to restart elsewhere." For a brief, terrible moment, Willa felt temptation rise. $300 was more money than she'd ever seen. It could buy a small place in town, perhaps even a business of her own. But this land was more than soil and trees. It held her mother's grave beneath the old oak. It contained her father's dreams and her own childhood. And now, impossibly, it harbored new possibilities she hadn't dared imagine yesterday. "Thank you for your offer," she said with a calm she didn't feel. "But as I said, the land is not for sale. The mortgage payment will be made on time." Mason's face darkened. "This is absurd. You're a woman alone with no means of support. Even with Lowell's help, you can't possibly." "She's not alone," Bennett interrupted, his voice like steel. "And she has more means than you know. The spring on the North Ridge changes everything." The shock on Mason's face confirmed what Willa had suspected. He hadn't known about the water source. The value of her land had just increased tenfold in his eyes. The elder Webb recovered first. A convenient discovery. Nevertheless, the terms of the loan remain. $50, 28 days. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "We'll take our leave, gentlemen. Miss Nichols clearly needs time to reconsider her position." As they rode away, Bennett turned to her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You realize they'll do everything possible to prevent us from succeeding?" "Yes," she said simply. "Which is why we have to start immediately. You mentioned men in town who might help with the timber?" His slow smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I'll ride back now and start making arrangements. We can begin cutting tomorrow." As he prepared to leave, Willa impulsively caught his sleeve. "Bennett, thank you. Not just for the help, but for—" She struggled to find the right words. "For seeing me, even when I didn't see you." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a hope kindled. "I've always seen you, Willa. From the very first day." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Bennett rallied nearly a dozen men to help with the timber cutting. Some came out of respect for Ezra Nichols, others because they despised the Webb's banking practices, and a few simply because Bennett Lowell had extended them credit in hard times and asked for repayment in labor rather than cash. Willa worked alongside them all, learning to fell trees, strip bark, and cut lumber to the railroad's specifications. By the end of the first week, they had cleared a small section of the ridge and produced enough timber to secure an initial payment from the railroad's purchasing agent, $15, delivered with a grudging respect for the quality of the pine. But their progress didn't go unnoticed. The Webbs began applying pressure wherever they could. Credit at other businesses in town was suddenly denied to anyone helping at the Nichols place. The price of supplies at every store but Bennett's mysteriously increased, and rumors began circulating that the railroad might change its route entirely, making any timber contracts worthless. Through it all, Bennett remained steadfast. When supplies couldn't be purchased in town, he made trips to the next settlement to procure them. When men were warned away from helping, he personally guaranteed their accounts at his store regardless of how long the Webbs' vendetta might last. And every evening, as the sun set over the half-cleared ridge, he and Willa would sit on her porch, planning the next day's work and sharing quiet conversations that gradually revealed the people they had become. She learned that he had taught himself bookkeeping at 16 to save his father's failing store, that he dreamed of expanding to create a proper emporium that could supply everything from farm equipment to fine fabrics, that he read the same adventure novels she secretly loved. He discovered her passion for botany, cultivated through careful study of her mother's old books, her skill with a rifle, honed during the winters when game meant the difference between hunger and survival, her ability to recite Wordsworth from memory, a remnant of her mother's insistence on education even in the wilderness. By the beginning of the third week, they had $38 set aside, the railroad agent having purchased 2 more loads of timber. The irrigation channels were nearly complete, and the first seeds had been planted in the newly watered fields. Hope, the original chicken, had begun laying eggs. The impossible suddenly seemed within reach. Then disaster struck. Willa awoke one morning to the smell of smoke. Rushing outside, she saw flames engulfing the stacked timber at the edge of the clearing, their entire third shipment, worth at least $20, burning furiously in the dawn light. By the time Bennett and the other workers arrived, it was too late to save the lumber. The fire had been deliberately set. Coal oil accelerant still reeked from the charred remains. Webb, Bennett growled, kicking at the smoldering ruins. Has to be. Can you prove it? Asked Thomas, who had become one of their most dedicated helpers. Bennett shook his head grimly. Not in any way that would matter. The setback was devastating. With just a week until the payment was due, they were still $12 short, and the remaining timber couldn't be processed in time. That afternoon, as the discouraged workers departed, Bennett found Willa sitting beside the spring on the ridge, staring into the clear water. "We'll find another way," he said, settling beside her. "What other way?" she asked, fatigue evident in her voice. "We've cut every tree we can reach, planted every seed. Even if I sold the horse and everything in the house, it wouldn't be enough." Bennett was quiet for a long moment, watching the water bubble up from between the rocks. "Finally," he said, "there is one option we haven't discussed." She looked up, surprised by the hesitancy in his tone. "I could loan you the remaining amount," he said carefully. "From my personal savings, not the store's accounts." Pride flashed across her face. "I told you before." "I know," he interrupted gently. "You won't accept charity. But this isn't charity, Willa. It's—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "It's an investment in our future." "Our future," she repeated, her heart suddenly beating faster. Bennett took a deep breath. "I had planned to do this differently. Not out of necessity or with the threat of foreclosure hanging over us. But yes, our future." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I love you, Willa Nichols. I think I have since the first time I saw you ride into town with your chin held high despite the dust and the hardship. I love your strength, your determination, your refusal to surrender what matters most." She stared at him, speechless, as he continued. "I'm not proposing marriage as a solution to your financial troubles. I'm proposing partnership in every sense. I want to build something with you, whether it's on this land or somewhere else. I want to wake up beside you and face whatever challenges come our way together." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Bennett," he squeezed her hand. "You don't have to answer now. The offer of the loan stands regardless. If you accept my proposal, we'll consider it part of our shared resources. If not, you can repay me when the next timber is sold. Either way, you keep your land and your independence." The generosity of it, the careful respect for her pride and her choices, touched her deeply. But even more moving was the realization that somewhere amid the chaos of timber and irrigation ditches and mortgage payments, she had fallen in love with Bennett Lowell. With his steady presence each morning, bringing coffee and plans for the day, with his quiet authority as he directed the workers, always treating them as equals rather than hired hands, with the way his eyes sought hers across the clearing, checking that she was well, that she approved of decisions made. "Bennett," she said softly, "I don't need time to consider." A shout from the direction of the house interrupted her. They both turned to see Thomas running up the path, waving frantically. "Bennett, Miss Nichols, come quick. The banker's here with the sheriff." They found Webb Sr. and the county sheriff waiting in the yard, along with Mason and 2 bank clerks. The banker held a sheaf of papers in one hand, his expression smugly triumphant. "Miss Nichols," he began without preamble, "I regret to inform you that the terms of your mortgage have changed." "That's not possible," Bennett said sharply. "The agreement is legally binding." "Indeed it is," Webb agreed with a thin smile. "However, upon careful review of the document, we discovered a clause allowing for acceleration of the debt in the event of significant alteration to the property." "What alteration?" Willa demanded. "The cutting of timber, Miss Nichols. Your father pledged the trees as collateral against the loan. By selling them, you've reduced the value of the bank's security." He thrust the papers forward. "The full amount, $200, is now due immediately." The sheriff looked uncomfortable but nodded confirmation. "I've reviewed the documents myself, Miss Nichols. They appear to be in order." "This is outrageous," Bennett sputtered. "No court would uphold such a blatant manipulation." "Perhaps not," Webb conceded. "But the legal proceedings would take months, during which time the property would remain in the bank's possession." His smile widened. "Unless, of course, payment is made by noon tomorrow." As they departed, Mason lingered behind. "My offer still stands," he said quietly to Willa. "A simple ceremony tomorrow morning, and all this unpleasantness disappears." Bennett's hands clenched into fists, but Willa placed a restraining touch on his arm. "Mr. Webb," she said with deadly calm, "I would sooner burn this place to the ground than see it become yours through such means." After they were gone, Willa and Bennett stood in stunned silence, the magnitude of the setback washing over them. $200 might as well have been 2,000. "It's over," Willa whispered, the fight suddenly draining from her. "They've won." Bennett paced the yard, his expression shifting from anger to concentration. "Not yet," he said finally. "There's still one possibility." "What?" "The store." He stopped pacing, his decision apparently made. "I can use it as collateral for a loan. $200 should be possible, given the inventory and property value." Willa stared at him, aghast. "You can't risk your business. Everything you've worked for is worth nothing if I don't stand for what's right," he finished firmly. "The Webbs have been bullying this town for too long. If they succeed here, they'll only grow bolder. But if you can't repay the loan, then I'll start again," he said simply. "With you, if you'll have me." His green eyes held hers steadily. "You never did answer my proposal, you know. Despite everything, the crisis, the betrayal, the looming disaster." Willa felt a smile tugging at her lips. "You're asking now? With everything falling apart around us?" "Especially now," Bennett said, stepping closer. "Because I want you to know that my feelings have nothing to do with property or business arrangements or old promises between our fathers. I love you, Willa Nichols. Land or no land, store or no store." In that moment, with the sun setting behind him and his face earnest with emotion, Bennett Lowell was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. And the answer that had been forming in her heart these past weeks sprang easily to her lips. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. To partnership, to marriage, to facing whatever comes next together." The kiss they shared was brief but filled with promise, a pledge more binding than any mortgage or contract. When they parted, Bennett's eyes were alight with renewed determination. "I'll ride into town immediately," he said. "Thomas can help me prepare the loan documents tonight. By morning—" "Wait," Willa interrupted, a sudden thought striking her. "The letter from my father, he mentioned an agreement with your father. What if there's something more to it? Something that could help us now?" Bennett frowned. "My father never spoke of specifics, only that Ezra Nichols was the reason we survived the typhoid outbreak." "We need to check your father's papers," Willa said urgently. "There might be something." Anything that could give us leverage. They rode to town together, arriving at the darkened store as the last customers were leaving nearby establishments. Bennett lit a lamp in the back office and began rifling through a dusty strongbox of his father's documents. For an hour they searched, finding nothing but routine business records and personal correspondence. Then, just as despair began to set in anew, Willa unfolded a yellowed letter tucked into the binding of an old ledger. "Bennett," she breathed, scanning the contents. "Look at this." The letter was from her father to Richard Lowell, dated 10 years earlier. "Richard, as discussed, I've transferred the deed for the North Ridge timber stand to your name as security against the loan of medical supplies and provisions during the outbreak. Should your business require it, you are free to harvest the timber at any time, though I hope to repay the debt before such measures become necessary. With sincere gratitude." Ezra Nichols. Bennett read it twice, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization. "The timber rights, my father owned them separately from the land itself. And if he never sold them back to my father, then they weren't part of the mortgage collateral at all," Bennett finished. "The Webbs have no claim on them. But would the rights have transferred to you when your father died?" Willa asked anxiously. Bennett was already pulling out another document, his father's will. He scanned it quickly, then looked up with a triumphant smile. "All business assets and interests passed to me. If the timber rights were never formally returned to your father, then legally. You own the trees we've been cutting," Willa whispered. "And the Webb's entire claim of acceleration is fraudulent." Bennett's eyes gleamed with righteous satisfaction. "We've got them." The next morning, precisely at noon, Willa and Bennett stood on the porch of her homestead as the Webbs arrived, accompanied by the sheriff and, surprisingly, the railroad agent. "I assume you're prepared to vacate the premises," the elder Webb began pompously. "Actually," Bennett said, stepping forward with a leather folio in hand, "we're prepared to file charges of attempted fraud." He proceeded to lay out the evidence. The timber rights legally belonged to the Lowell family, not to Ezra Nichols, and had never been part of the mortgage agreement. The sheriff reviewed the documents with growing concern, while the banker's face flushed with anger. "This changes nothing," Webb blustered. "The original mortgage payment is still due." "Indeed it is," Willa agreed calmly. She held out an envelope. $50, as agreed. "You'll find it's all in order." Mason snatched the envelope, counting the money with visible disappointment. "Where did you get this?" The railroad agent cleared his throat. "From me, actually. I've purchased the remaining timber rights from Mr. Lowell for a considerable sum. As the legal owner, he was fully entitled to sell." The Webb's defeat was complete. With the mortgage payment made and their fraudulent scheme exposed, they had no choice but to withdraw, though not without Mason's parting threat that this isn't over. After they'd gone, the railroad agent approached Willa and Bennett with an unexpected proposal. "I've been authorized to offer you a contract for railroad ties from your land, Miss Nichols. The quality of your pine is exceptional, and the location convenient for our planned route." "That's very generous," Willa replied. "But I believe Mr. Lowell owns the timber rights." "Actually," Bennett interjected, "as of this morning, the rights have been transferred back to their rightful owner." He handed Willa another document, a deed returning the timber rights to the Nichols property, signed and notarized that very morning. The railroad agent smiled. "Then I'll make the offer to both of you, as partners. $500 for exclusive rights to harvest the timber over the next 2 years, with your oversight of the cutting to ensure the land isn't damaged." It was more money than Willa had ever imagined, enough to pay off the mortgage entirely and still have capital for expanding both their enterprises. As they stood on the porch later that evening, watching the sunset paint the newly cleared ridge in gold, Bennett slipped an arm around Willa's waist. "So," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "what happens now, partner?" Willa leaned into his embrace, marveling at how much had changed in a month. From one chicken to the promise of a future she'd never dared imagine. "Now," she said, "we build something worth having. Together." 1 week later, the entire town gathered for a wedding unlike any Willow Creek had seen. The ceremony took place on the Nichols homestead, beneath the old oak where Willa's mother rested. Flowers from the newly irrigated fields adorned every surface, and 6 fat hens, including Hope, scratched contentedly in a nearby pen. As Willa and Bennett exchanged their vows, Mason Webb and his father were conspicuously absent, having departed for Denver the day after their scheme collapsed, rumors of banking irregularities dogging their heels. The railroad agent, now a friend, presented the couple with their first wedding gift, a formal contract for the timber, with the first payment already deposited in an account opened in both their names at the new bank being established in town. When the celebration finally wound down and the last guests departed, Bennett led Willa to the porch swing he'd installed as a surprise wedding present. As they swayed gently in the gathering twilight, he pulled a small package from his pocket. "One last gift," he said, placing it in her hands. Inside, Willa found a beautifully carved wooden sign, the letters burned deep into the pine. "Lowell and Nichols Farm." "I thought we might keep both names," Bennett explained, "to honor what each of us brought to this partnership." Tears of happiness welled in Willa's eyes as she traced the letters with her fingertip. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Just like the chicken that started it all." Bennett laughed, pulling her close. "Who would have thought that when you could only afford one chicken, you'd end up with the whole farm? And the storekeeper too?" "The best bargain I ever made," Willa replied, leaning up to kiss him as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and the farm prospered, Bennett and Willa often marveled at how the humblest beginnings, one chicken, purchased with the last of her money, had led to the richest of lives, measured not in acres or dollars, but in love that, like the spring on the North Ridge, had appeared just when it was needed most and never ran dry.